Hello and welcome to the next in my series of free webinars that I host each month on a whole range of different topics, mainly focusing on nutrition and how it can support running performance. If this is your first time watching, welcome. I hope you're going to find this useful and beneficial. In terms of me, my name's James. I'm a registered sport and exercise nutritionist, and basically something I've started to do recently is host free monthly webinars on a whole range of topics to help athletes of all levels with their nutrition to achieve their goals, whether that be health goals, performance goals, perform well in competitions. And so if you are seeing this for the first time, do check out my social media because I do host webinars each month. So if you'd like to attend some of them live, you're more than welcome to. This is a pre-recorded version that I'm doing on my own talking to you now. With the ones I do live, there is then some time for some questions afterwards as well for those that have actually joined the session. So if that's something you'd like to get involved in, then please keep an eye out. So you can see my social media details at the bottom, and also check out my website. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. So in terms of me then, as I say, I'm a registered sport and exercise nutritionist. In terms of my background, I have a Bachelor of Science from Brunel University in Sports Science. I have a Master's in Sport and Exercise Nutrition from Loughborough University, and I'm also on what's called the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register, which is essentially an important accredited program that all sport and exercise nutritionists should go through. In terms of who I work for or who I work with a whole range of athletes, teams, disciplines, from first team right down to youth athletes and even the parents and coaches too. In terms of the sports I work across, I currently work across professional football, cricket. I work with some different rugby players as well as sports. I work with a few golfers, and at the moment I'm also working with lots of runners, ranging from those that have maybe just started out in their running journey, looking for a little bit more guidance, ideas when it comes to how to fuel their training, their health goals, performance goals, to those that are maybe a little bit more advanced, those that run, they compete on a regular basis as well. And all this information that I share in today is hopefully going to help you with your health goals and what it is that you're trying to do. So like I say, each month I put out a poll of what people want me to cover in these webinars, and the one for this month was around how to manage your nutrition to achieve your optimal running performance, but equally around other health goals such as losing weight, and that's what I'm really going to focus on in today's session. I suppose the first thing that a lot of people think of when it comes to losing weight is around these sort of, I suppose, what are considered quick fix diets. I don't call them a quick fix just because usually at diets it's something short term, so it's almost a short term temporary option, just because with diets they're usually not sustainable, they impact your performance in other ways, and again it just doesn't work in the long term. So hopefully what I'm going to share with you in this webinar now is going to be quite useful. The other side to this is when people want to lose weight, they tend to go on, I suppose, this crash dieting. They look for these, I suppose, quick fix, these easy access options. Again, there's no need to be doing this. Again, actually restricting your energy or restricting yourself too much, too soon, too quickly, this is not sustainable. And it can actually lead to some other complications. And so if we're not getting the energy, or the body's not getting the energy that it needs, it can actually have the opposite effect. So it can actually start to, rather than losing fat mass, you're potentially losing your muscle mass. And obviously the muscle is a key determinant or key part of your running performance. Can also impact your body's ability to heal itself and optimize that recovery. So if your recovery process is affected, it's going to take you longer to recover, and that can be the difference between you winning and losing your next competition if you're feeling still really sore, really fatigued. And equally, it can impair that training adaptation that you get from the training itself. Equally, if we haven't got the energy, if the body hasn't got the nutrients that it needs, it can start to increase our risk of injury and illness too, and affect our overall health and well-being. So what's really important when we approach anything? I think a good starting point is to consider a few factors, a few things first. First of all, and this is where we can come on to this concept, this idea of energy balance. Energy balance is essentially the difference between the energy that we consume versus the energy that we output. In terms of where we get our energy from, this essentially comes from the food and drink that we consume. So when we have something to eat, something to drink, it's broken down in the body and it's digested into the energy, all those different nutrients that we need as part of a balanced diet. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. In terms of how we expend energy, this is mainly done through your day-to-day activity, your exercise, going for a run, any, I suppose, non-exercise activity movements as well. So walking to work, walking to school, taking the kids to school, hoovering, dusting, household chores, would also count here. But then equally, we'll still be using a huge amount of energy to essentially help us live. And this is where we have our BMR, or basal metabolic rate. So basal metabolic rate that you can see represented by the human body image. This is essentially the amount of energy that we need in order to live. So even when you're asleep, even if you were to stay in bed all day, you would be using a certain amount of energy to help maintain all those processes going forward. And what we can start to do, this is quite a nice visual way to show you what's actually going on in the body. So when your energy intake matches your energy output, you're going to stay weight stable. So I'm sure I'll talk a little bit about energy energy and calorie guidelines in a moment. But I'm sure you've all heard of around this 2,000 calories per day. So if you're consuming 2,000 calories per day, expending 2,000 calories per day as well, you're going to start to stay weight stable. If we start to manipulate this a little bit, so the first way is if your energy intake is higher than your energy output, so you're eating more than you usually do, you're eating more compared to the amount of activity that you do, or maybe your activity is a lot less compared to your energy intake, we're now creating this sort of calorie surplus. And it's this sort of calorie surplus, this excess energy, excess calories, what the body doesn't need, what it doesn't use, ends up being converted to and stored as fat, leading to this weight increase. What we want to focus on is almost the opposite side. It is almost the opposite side. So to help with weight loss, this is about being in a calorie deficit. And in order to do this, we either need to increase that activity, increase how much movement you're doing each day, or we need to start to reduce your energy intake. So there's a few options, a few ways in which you can do this. But essentially, to help with that weight loss, it is about being in that slight calorie deficit. As I say, you don't need to be in a massive calorie deficit. It's not about massively restricting yourself each day. As I just mentioned, this can have a number of negative impacts on our body. And one of which is what's called relative energy deficiency in sport, or sometimes referred to as REDS. REDS is a fairly new concept, a fairly new topic. You may have heard of this before. Most people haven't. And this is basically, or REDS is basically this period, if you like, where your body is suffering from low energy availability. So lack of energy can start to impact things like bone health, immune system, for ladies impacting things like menstrual function, and some other things too. In terms of what causes it, most of the time it's not done intentionally. It's caused by maybe restricted eating, overtraining, or maybe a combination of the two. So this is where you're not really matching up, or your energy intake, the difference between your energy intake, your energy output is in that calorie deficit, but equally it's too great, it's too much. And this is where it can lead to some other health complications, like I say. In terms of some of the signs and symptoms, could be a number of things. It could be anything from disrupting your sleep, things like if you're feeling really bloated, really constipated all the time, increased fatigue, so you feel tired all the time, but for no real reason or no real explanation. As I mentioned, can impact things like your immune function, as well as increased injury. So if you're finding that you're picking up lots of coughs and colds on a regular basis, if lots of injuries are popping up, such as stress fractures, for example, this could be linked to this low energy availability. Not saying it's guaranteed, not saying it's for definite, but this may be one possible explanation. And of course, in terms of how REDS then affects you, it affects your ability to train. You can't train at that level that you should be able to, and of course can impact your overall performance. So again, it could be the difference between winning and losing your next race or your next competition. When it comes to weight loss or changes in weight loss, if you like, is a very complex topic in terms of there are so many factors that do impact or influence the number on the scales. First of all, it's impacted or influenced by what it is that you eat. So what you eat, how much you eat of certain foods can have a huge impact. Again, a runner's diet, particularly during intense periods of training, when you've got a really packed schedule, you're doing at a sort of higher distance, higher mileage. It's your diet is going to be predominantly made up of the carbohydrate. And what a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of is when we start to increase our carbohydrate consumption, carbohydrate is stored as glycogen in the muscle. However, with every gram of glycogen stored in the muscle, there is this sort of increased water retention. So, for every gram of glycogen, you're looking at about an additional 3 to 4 grams of water stored within the muscle, which that too can be having an impact on your weight. Equally, it's also affected by sort of when you're eating. So when you come to weigh yourself, you look at the number on the scales, this will be impacted by the last time you actually had something to eat, something to drink previously. It can be impacted by things like hydration status. So the difference that you get in terms of when you're in a dehydrated state compared to a hydrated state, again, can have quite a significant impact as well. Again, everyone's different in terms of sweat rate, in terms of how much fluid they lose, but particularly after a long run, if you were to weigh yourself, again, taking into account how much you've actually had to drink, you'll probably find that you'll lose best part of maybe 2 to 3 kilograms, if not more, maybe more than that, maybe a little bit less than that, depending on the individual, after a big training session. And dehydration can have a huge impact on your performance as well. Again, your weight can also be affected by last time you went to the toilet. So if you haven't been to the toilet for a little while, this too can impact your measurements, your reading as well. And then for ladies, it can also be impacted by sort of menstrual cycle as well. This is by no means a definitive list, but it's just a few examples of some of these factors that can impact your weight to begin with. Again, I should say I'd say your number on the scales does not signify your success, if you like. Your weight is just a very small part of a very small part of the puzzle piece, if you like. Again, a lot of people tend to focus on this tiny little section, but actually there's so many other ways in which you can track your progress, monitor how you're getting on, and it's a good way to maybe see some changes. So in terms of what you might do, the number on the scales may not be changing much, might not be changing maybe week to week. However, what you might start to notice is things like changes in your girth, changes in things like your waist circumference, for example. As I say, you can have two individuals that weigh exactly the same. However, I suppose that difference in appearance can vary quite significantly. So you might start to notice a reduction in your waist circumference, maybe a reduction in things like the circumference of your thigh, and there's other measurements, other places you can take those measurements as well. So again, I'd call that a massive win. That's all going to help towards your overall health goal. Equally, how well you're sleeping. So with this change in training, where you're at, you might find that you're sleeping a lot better than you usually do. Again, sleep is so important. Again, I won't talk about sleep in too much detail as part of this webinar, but your sleep, or how well you sleep the previous night, will then affect your behaviour the next day, how well you recover from your training, how well you perform at your next training session as well. It could be things like your overall performance. So again, in terms of your overall performance, the number on the scales may not be changing significantly, but if you notice that you're hitting PBs, you're able to maintain a quicker split, a quicker time for a longer period of time, again, that's a really good sign that things are going in the right way. Other things might be how your clothes fit. So again, you might notice that if you've got a t-shirt, pair of jeans, shorts, trousers, that sort of thing, if they start to feel a little bit looser on you, chances are you've lost weight. Chances are you've seen some improvements in your body composition as well. Equally, things like this is what's called a skin fold caliper. This is done, or should be done, if you're thinking about getting this done, it should be done by a qualified individual who has done what's called their Isaac training. And basically, a skin fold caliper measures the sort of skin fold thickness at 8 sites around your body. And that individual, usually a nutritionist, but you might find it with a strength and conditioning coach, you might find it across a whole range of people. They can then provide you with, a written report of what your figures, what your measurements are, and you can start to set some targets to monitor your progress. And actually, it's a good way to monitor that change in body composition as you go, particularly through a period of training. The other way I do is actually how you feel. Yes, yeah, that maybe you've not hit the weight that you're after, or you haven't hit that weight target yet, as of yet. But equally, if you feel better, if you're training better, you feel happier, I call that a massive win as well. So again, this is by no means a definitive list, but using a combination of these methods, these measurements, I think gives you a much bigger, broader picture of your overall progress as you go. The other thing I'd say is about setting realistic goals. I've worked for a number of years now across a whole range of industries, not just in sport. I've also worked in health and well-being. And I have conversations with a whole range of individuals, those that have maybe gone on to do further studies. They've gone off to uni in order to get their dream job, they've gone off to university, they've done a Bachelor of Science, they've done a Master's, some have even done PhDs. And obviously, to get that qualification for their dream role, it's taken time, it's taken consistency, and it's taken a lot of additional education. When you think about going from the end of school to a PhD, if you've done a master's in between, you're looking 3 years for your undergrad, at least a year for your master's, and at least 3 years for your PhD itself. So that's an additional 7 years worth of education to get where you want to be. And there's lots of other examples I can use. Yet when it comes to, our health and well-being, we're always looking for these quick fix, these easy access options. So this is where some individuals try and use these products that claim to be fat burning or help with weight loss. Equally, individuals try and go on the crash diets that I mentioned about, thinking that's going to help them lose crazy amounts of weight. Again, in my experience, this is just definitely not the case. And this is where you do need to be realistic about your expectations. Most people, when it comes to weight loss, they expect to see something like what you can see on the screen. So they go from their starting week in week 1, and it's almost this diagonal line. So by the end of week 12, they would have lost multiple kilograms in weight. However, weight loss, as I say, it is incredibly complex. It's impacted by a number of factors, a number of things, and I think it's really important to take that into consideration, and actually setting yourself some more realistic goals. So really, weight loss looks something like what you can see in the graph on the right hand side. It is full of maybe slight ups and downs. Ups and downs, you might start to see periods where your weight does increase, maybe slightly. Again, this is perfectly this is perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with this. Incidentally, in terms of how you track and monitor your progress as well, there's lots of ways to do it. But actually turning your data, if you like, into something visual, like a graph, I think has a really powerful impact. Most people, what they do is maybe make a note on their phones. You might have a notepad where you might go, right, today's date, my weight was this, that date, it was that. And most people, what they do is they tend to compare their, previous measurement compared to the current measurement. So again, you're just looking at that very small part of the puzzle. Whereas if you were to plot your data into something like the graph that what you can see on the screen, and again, you can substitute the weight measurement on the y-axis on the left-hand side for all sorts of other measurements. If you were to plot your data, if you were to start today, for example, if you called today week 1, or called This Week, Week 1. And going forward, each week you then do your measurements, plot it in the graph, you end up with something like this. And you just start to see this really nice overall visual representation of the progress that you've made so far. Equally, it also works quite well in terms of identifying or trying to work out maybe why your weight has gone up. It could be for a number of reasons. Equally, due to things that are in your control, but equally those things that are out of your control as well. So again, very simple, very easy to create a graph in Excel, create yourself a bit of a monitoring program. Again, you might need to get someone to help you, friends, family members, but it literally takes a couple of minutes just to create yourself a little bit of a sort of tracking a graph or some spreadsheets, some calculations just to track your progress going forward. So, in terms of why you're maybe not losing weight, for some it could be through a whole range of things. I could literally spend probably a couple of hours talking through every single factor, every single thing. But what I'm going to do now is just focus on, I suppose, what I've seen to be 5 of the most common reasons why. This is, again, so what I mean there is this is by no means a definitive list. It's just a few of the more common examples that I tend to see with some of the runners, individuals that I've worked with. I'd say the first part to this, it comes back to what I said, or what I showed you there with the energy balance equation. Essentially, that change in weight or lack of weight change is all to do with maybe a mismatch between your energy intake compared to your training, your nutrition, and your other health goals. As I say, being in this sort of large or very big calorie deficit is maybe too much. This is where it starts to impact our health in other ways. So, going into that low energy availability mode, it is a little bit like when your phone goes into the low battery mode. Still works, but a lot of those functions are compromised. They're only operating at not 100%. They might be a little bit compromised. Certain things might start to switch off. So your phone is now prioritizing where it's going to send the energy. And this is essentially what's going on within the body itself. Equally, for some, it's where they may be over consuming. So this where they're going the other way. So their energy intake is a lot higher. It's much higher than it should be. So again, it's a little bit almost the opposite effect. So using the phone analogy there, it's almost a bit like overloading your battery. So again, overloading your battery does get to the point where it might start to affect its performance that way. And again, the body's the same thing. So what the body doesn't need, what it doesn't use, ends up being converted to and stored as fat. In terms of why this might be, I think something I come across quite often is when individuals are starting to track, or they track everything. I think it's not to say you shouldn't track your progress, but I think there are a few things just to be aware of. One, these devices, they're not accurate at all. So some of you, if you're watching this, you might have smartphones, you might have watches, you might have things like Apple Watches, Fitbits, that sort of thing. They're not 100% accurate. The amount of people that I've spoken to before where they say, oh, I've burnt 600 calories doing this particular exercise, going for this run. Chances are you probably haven't. A slightly different example, I enjoy playing golf, and I played golf the other day, and at the end of my round, it said I'd burnt 2,500 calories after about a 4-hour round. I definitely wouldn't have burnt I definitely wouldn't have burnt as much as that. In fact, a recent research paper actually looked at the energy expenditure of golfers, and based on that, for me, I probably would have burnt maybe closer to 600 to about 800 calories. So you do need to take some of these measurements with a pinch of salt, if you like. It's the same on the devices as well. So if you use things like Strava, if you use things like, some of these other apps to track your exercise, your day-to-day movement, and at the end where it says, oh, you've completed your run, you ran this distance, here's your split, here's the amount of calories that you burn. Again, definitely not 100% accurate. Again, it is just a rough guide. How much you actually expended will vary from person to person. The only way to really test this is to visit a lab, spend 24 hours in a lab where they'll take all sorts of measurements to actually test how much energy you're expending each day. Same with some of the calorie counting apps as well. Some people swear by things like MyFitnessPal. Again, there's lots of other examples that you can use as well. Same thing here, they're not 100% accurate. There's about a 20% variation or 20% leeway in terms of the calorie content of food and drinks. The other thing with some of these apps is the fact they're not monitored by professionals. It's anyone adding that data in terms of I could add a particular food on there, copy the nutrition information. If I put the nutrition information in wrong, and then for yourself, you then have that particular food or drink. What you've there then becomes quite a difference in terms of what you've had compared to what you think you had. So this is where, again, maybe you're over consuming in terms of the calories, in terms of the sugar, salt, some of those other ingredients as well. So do bear this in mind. By all means, still use them to track your split time, track your movement, things like that. But when looking at the calorie content, again, I'd maybe not focus on this one in too much detail. One thing, again, I should say, in terms of tracking your progress, I think it is useful to an extent. I think it's useful to help you in terms of raising your awareness. You might go, oh, that's something I'm doing. That's not so good for me. I need to do this instead. And hopefully my webinars, my content that I'm posting on my social media is certainly helping with that. The reason I say the calorie counting is useful to an extent is, yes, it can help you in terms of identifying roughly what you're having each day. But equally, if you're over consuming or having too much or having more, if you're maybe consuming or over focusing on some of this content, this is where it can lead to the risk of when we get into the realms of disordered eating. So if you find that you are starting to focus more or mainly on the calories in everything rather than the overall nutrition content of that particular food or drink, maybe it's worth just holding off for a little bit. Equally, doesn't mean you have to start tracking your calories every single day, start weighing out everything as well. If you want to do that, by all means, go for it. But again, I've done this for a number of years, and I already know most people last a couple of days where they are honest, they're really on it. But after that point, it just becomes quite boring, quite dull, quite monotonous, and so they don't really track what they're doing. A really simple version in terms of food tracking, calorie counter, is just this simple table that you can see on the screen. So you can see there's 2 rows and 4 columns. The first column is where you make a note of the meal type and time of day. So that could be breakfast at 7 a.m, lunch at 1 p.m, dinner at 6 p.m, and any snacks in between, any snacks you've had around training, around your sort of competitions. The second column is where you make a note of the specific food or drink that you're having. So when it comes to your food and drink in terms of the brands, you could walk into any section of the supermarket. You'd find multiple versions of the same type of food or the same type of drink, and you'd find the nutrition content does vary very, very significantly. And again, there are a lot of products out there to make us feel they're really healthy, really good for us. But actually, when you start to look into this in a little bit more detail, maybe not so much the case. There are a lot of products out there that do contain additional calories, salt, sugar, fat, without us realizing. Again, I'm not going to talk about food labels, nutrition tables as part of this webinar. But again, a lot of this information can certainly be quite useful, something to bear in mind, maybe next time you go shopping. So in terms of this column, don't just put, I had a bowl of cereal before your long run. Specify what it was. Was it a bowl? Was it a supermarket brand? Was it a premium brand? Nothing wrong with that at all. Like I say, you just need to make a note of what it actually is. The more detail you can add to this, the more effective you'll find it. Equally, with some of your drinks. So obviously if you're having water out of the tap, that's fine. But if you're having some of these other brands, if you're having some orange juice, maybe with your cereal, make a note of what the brand is. So again, same thing. You can go into a supermarket, you could have the supermarket version compared to a premium version, and the nutrition content will vary quite significantly. The third column is then the amount. So no matter, again, quite often I get the question of, or I get questions around sort of this idea of good food and bad food. For me, it's not a case of good food and bad food. It is more this case of everything in moderation. Certain foods, certain drinks we can have lots of every day. Certain foods, certain drinks, we might need to reduce how often we have them. It's not so much the what that it makes the difference, it's the amounts of any food, any drink that we consume that will certainly have a huge impact. And this is again something that a lot of people don't do, is actually monitor how much they're having or how much they're consuming. Again, as I say, by no means does that mean you've all got to start tracking or weighing out your ingredients every single day. A couple of things that can be quite helpful though is, if you have got skills, if you have got time, just to maybe have a little bit of play around with what are certain sizes, or what do certain portion sizes actually look like. So if you look at some packaging and it says a recommended serving size, have a look at what that's actually the equivalent to in terms of food. And I've got some examples of that in a moment. If, again, using simple measurements, if you have anything in a jar or a tin, so let's say you have a tin of soup for lunch, if you look at the packaging, it says the weight of it was maybe 400 grams. Well, you've had around a 400-gram tin of soup. If you have half a tin, you've had roughly 200 grams. Equally, with maybe other foods, if you have anything like bread, how many slices did you have? Using things like your hands as a guide, how many handfuls, how many teaspoons, how many bottles of water have you had to drink today? Any measurement or anything that can give you a rough idea of the amounts of some of these foods, you're going to find this really helpful, really effective too. And then the fourth column, slightly different. This is essentially your why. So why did you have that particular food or drink? Was it for reasons of genuine hunger, or was it for reasons of something else? So stress eating, bored. Could it be when you came in after your long run, you just felt really hungry, you end up maybe over consuming on all sorts of food, all sorts of drinks as well. Something else that, and this sort of follows on quite nicely, something else that does happen quite often is when individuals consume additional calories, maybe additional sugar as well, at certain times without realising it. One of the most common, or one of the big culprits for this, is alcohol. I appreciate not everyone consumes alcohol, but again, alcohol is very calorific. 1 gram of alcohol contains around 7 calories. So to put this into perspective, if I start with wine, if you're having a glass of wine, a medium glass of wine of your 13% alcoholic volume, things like Malbec, Merlot, things like Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio. One glass, you're looking 160 calories, thereabouts. If that one glass becomes, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4, you may be looking at anything from maybe an additional 400 calories plus, without taking into account anything that you've had to eat or drink. Same with things like beers and lagers. So again, a pint of beer, a pint of 4% lager. So things like Guinness, things like Guinness, things like Foster's, would again be somewhere around 200 calories. Again, as that alcoholic volume increases, so would the calorie content. So things like pint of Moretti, pint of Heineken, pint of Stella, you're looking probably closer to maybe 220, 230 calories per individual pint. And again, the same thing here. 1 pint becomes, say, 3 or 4. Again, all of a sudden, that's maybe an additional 600 calories plus that you've had without taking that into consideration too. And then same with things like spirits. So again, a single measurement is 25 milliliters based on your 40% spirit. So most vodkas, most gins would be somewhere within this region. And again, one single measurement contains around 60 calories per measurement. I should say with this, I'm just talking about the alcohol content. Again, if that one single becomes maybe a couple, again, you're looking just under 200 calories. You may look at that and go, oh wow, that's really good, not too much of an issue. Absolutely. The thing that a lot of people don't realise though is when they start to add all the sugary mixers, so vodka and lemonade, rum and coke, things like that, all of a sudden the sugar content goes up, the calorie content goes up, and as I say, alcohol can then have quite a significant impact in terms of our energy intake, and on top of that can impact a number of aspects of our other lifestyle in terms of behaviour, in terms of the impact on appetite, food choices as well. And again, alcohol in itself is another topic that I'll do for another webinar. Same with some of those non-alcoholic drinks. So again, a lot of people, or for a lot of people, we're all aware of maybe when we've had a sweet drink, a sugary drink, so something like a bottle of Coke. And for example, it is a good example of this. Equally, though, we're not necessarily aware of the sugar content, calorie content of some of these other options. So you can see two in the middle, very good examples. Is some of these pre-made smoothies, pre-made fruit juices. So you can see things like some of these, they're marketed in a way to make us feel they're really healthy, really good for you. But again, they tend to lack any of the nutritional benefit, huge amounts of added sugar, which pushes the calorie content up quite dramatically as well. And if you're having a lot of these on a regular basis, again, can certainly have an impact too. The third area, I suppose, is actually again linking the sort of those to those other 2 points. It's actually not managing your portion sizes to begin with. As I say, no matter what the food, no matter what the drink is, how much you consume will always make the biggest difference in terms of your health goals in the first place. Again, most people tend to fill up their plate with whatever it is. You set up, if you're going to boil some pasta, for example, you fill up your saucepan with water, leave it to boil, and you add a sort of keep shaking the pasta bag until you go, yeah, that'll do. Most people don't really take into account or don't really consider what these portions are the equivalent to. On the screen, you can see a fairly common example of a sort of nutrition table. So all nutrition information is displayed somewhere on the food packaging, either as a table like this, might be written as a few lines of words. But essentially, a nutrition table, in the first column, you've got the energy, the fat, saturated fat, carbohydrate, and so on. The second column will then tell you how much is in there per 100 grams of that particular food or drink that you're purchasing. And then in the third column, and this is my sort of really useful top tip for you all, is this is where they put a suggested serving or recommended serving size. So in this example, I think this was a pot of yogurt that I grabbed just off the internet. You can see there per half a pot is around 300 grams. Most people don't look at anything like this. Most people just maybe look at the first or second column. Those that do look at the third column in terms of that suggested serving, they go, yeah, perfect, that's great, no problem at all. However, they don't actually really take into account what that actually looks like. And so you can see a few examples on the screen. I really like this. I've taken this from the fitness chef. Some of you may have seen him again on social media, and what he's done, demonstrated this quite nicely, is comparing that suggested serving that you see on the sort of packaging on the food label compared to what most people have. So if we start off with the left hand side with things like the breakfast cereal, you can see the difference there between 30 grams of things like fruit granola on the left-hand side, 30 grams of Special K. They're about 132 calories and 113 calories respectively. However, most people, what they do, they get their bowl out, fill it up to the top with their cereal, and before they've added any milk or anything else, as you can see, all of a sudden that calorie content is a lot higher. So you go from 132 calories in a 30-gram serving to 350 calories in an 80-gram serving. Again, I'm not saying this is bad. I'm not saying you shouldn't do this or anything like that. Again, particularly with food, there is always a time and a place. But certain situations, certain times, if you're constantly doing this may be explaining that sort of weight gain or why you're maybe not losing weight to begin with. Again, a few other examples. When you look at things like chocolate, when you look at a sort of recommended serving, it tends not to be the whole bar. But for most people, who's going to eat half a bar? Most people, it tends to be the whole bar in itself. So again, you're consuming more calories than you actually necessarily realise to begin with. And again, you can see last few examples just around things like some biscuits. You've also got things like Smarties as well. So one chocolate hobnob in this example is around 90 or just over 90 calories. Most people have more than one. So if you were to have 3 hobnobs in this example, you're looking 280 calories. So when you look at what's actually the suggested serving size is of these different examples, again, obviously appreciate not everyone consumes those foods, those items on the screen. But when you look at that, you're looking just under 700 calories. Obviously, you can substitute those foods, those drinks that you do enjoy. Whereas, again, following, I suppose, what we tend to do, or what's maybe considered a bit more of a realistic portion, nearly 1,800 calories, nearly 3 times more that you're consuming compared to what's actually recommended in the first place. In terms of how much to have, then, in terms of guidelines, this is where, again, there are some guidelines to be aware of, and how much you need to consume of these different foods each day will vary from person to person based on a number of factors, whether you're exercising or not, training or not, and it will vary individually too. One, I suppose, simple idea, or one simple example that you can use is actually around using your hands as a guide. So again, there's different ways you can use your hand to provide you with a guideline of these different foods. So if we start with carbohydrate, a portion of carbohydrate is essentially a cupped hand. So a cupped hand of pre-cooked pasta, pre-cooked rice, oats if you like your porridge in the morning, things like a potato that would fit in your palm of your hand would be a good example there. For things like protein, a portion of protein is essentially a palm-sized piece. So that could be a palm-sized piece of chicken, palm-sized piece of fish. 2 eggs would count as a portion of protein as well. I should say, if you're vegan or vegetarian, a portion of protein for yourself, again, in terms of choices, you're relying or you're using things like your lentils, beans, and pulses, and a portion of those essentially would be, again, a sort of cupped hand. Again, in terms of vegetables, roughly a sort of fist size. So, again, a fist size portion of diced carrots, peas, peppers, sweet corn, that sort of thing as well. For some of your leafy greens, I mean, I should say a portion is roughly 80 grams. So, for some of your leafy greens, lettuce, kale, spinach, that would essentially be the equivalent to 2 cupped hands worth. And then for fats, very, very small amounts of fats. Well, again, hopefully as part of a healthy, balanced diet, you are getting lots of good quality sources of fat into your diet anyway. In terms of those added fats, so added fats are those that you add to the diet in terms of oils, butters, and spreads. We only need in very, very small amounts, so really using sort of the tip of your, essentially using the tip of your thumb. Or a good guideline is essentially 1 teaspoon of oil per person per meal, if that's a little bit easier. The other side to this is then, as well as what we do on a day-to-day basis, it is also really related to some other factors, things like sleep as well. Lack of sleep, poor sleep, particularly on a regular basis, it can have a really significant impact in terms of our weight for a number of reasons. So lack of sleep starts to impact our appetite hormones, starts to induce that hormone ghrelin and starts to suppress the leptin. So leptin is that hormone that makes us feel full. So when you have something to eat, that leptin content rises, you feel full, you don't need to consume anymore. When we're tired, that we see an increase in that ghrelin. So it's that ghrelin, that sort of, I suppose, hunger-inducing hormone that starts to increase. And this is where, again, particularly if we're really tired, we tend to focus on these quick and easy access options. So again, high calorie, high carbohydrate snacks and meals. Things like, so rather than, again, maybe in the morning, if you've had a really bad night's sleep, rather than getting up to have a bowl of porridge or something that takes maybe nothing crazy, but rather than something that takes a little bit more time to prepare, you tend to look for the quick, easy access options. The amount of times I've seen it where on the way to the train station, you see people walking along and they're just eating a handful of biscuits. I've even seen that in youth athletes as well. The other side to sleep is when, again, as I say, sleep is something that has a huge impact on so many aspects of our health, our performance. Yet it's probably something that is most overlooked. This is what I mean there is, if you're spending prolonged periods of time, if you're staying up later than you should be, again, it just gives you more opportunity where you may lead to you having something to eat and drink, which again can lead to further weight gain as well. I suppose going the other way in terms of an energy expenditure point of view, lack of sleep, if you're feeling really tired, really fatigued the next day, your physical activity levels tend to decrease. You're not going to do as much movement. And so again, it's that lack of movement, going back to my energy balance equation, that starts to have quite an impact there as well. The other side, I'd say, the other part to this, for me, I'd say is maybe, I suppose, lack of structure, if you like, around training and daily activity. Most people, what they tend to do is have pretty much the same thing every day, but that without really taking into account what their day to day looks like. And particularly if you're someone where your day does vary quite significantly, no day's the same, which I'm sure that would probably apply to a lot of people. Again, this may be explaining the sort of lack of weight change, or maybe why your weight is increasing too. Again, as part of that, as well as, I suppose, consuming the same foods, if you're using food, I suppose, as comfort, so when you're under stress, when we under a lot of pressure, food is there. It's this really easy, simple thing that we can use to maybe provide that temporary relief from what's maybe going on. Equally, when you come in after your training run, after your session, again, you've obviously done a hard session, done a hard workout, and we tend to feel quite hungry. So again, with a lot of the runners I've worked with, they don't really know what they should be consuming after exercise in the first place, or it is maybe something that they tend to overlook anyway. And again, this is where if you're really hungry, you just start to maybe eat and eat and eat, overconsume, and again, you're consuming more calories than you necessarily think. Sort of goes back to my point around the calorie tracking. The amount of people I've spoken to where they say they go to a gym class, maybe with their friends, and they finish their workout. It's like, oh yeah, we've burnt 300, 400 calories in a half an hour, 15-minute workout. Most of the time, probably haven't. Yet, what they then do is maybe go into the coffee shop, have a load of cakes, biscuits, coffees, things like that. And so, again, being a little bit more aware of that energy that you're consuming from your food and drink compared to what you're actually expending can have a huge effect as well. So the bit you're probably most interested in from this webinar is actually what can you do to actually lose weight at the same time as running your best. And hopefully what I'm going to share with you now is a bit of a brief insight into what you can do to help with that going forward. Again, one thing that we use in the world of sports nutrition, if you like, is this concept, this idea of fuel for the work required. So this is the idea that no day's the same, no athlete's the same, they're not doing the same amount of high intensity exercise each day, they're not doing the same duration, they've got lots of other things, lots of other factors going on. And this is something that you can start to apply to your lifestyle, to your training, to your health goals too. Fuel for the work required. This is a bit like a Formula One race. If you're someone that does follow the F1, if you're someone that does into your motorsport, for those of you that don't worry too much. But basically, in a Formula One race, obviously, years ago they used to have to, or used to fill up with petrol as part of the or through the race. Now, all the fueling has to be done before the race itself. When it comes to qualifying is short, sharp, who can set the fastest lap time, who can do the best time. And so they don't need the car being really loaded up, they don't need the car really heavy. And this is essentially a little bit like with a little bit like the body as well. If you're loading up your body for a really high intensity session, obviously this can increase or can potentially increase your weight as part of it again. But as you get into your training, you're starting to use those energy stores. So that tank, the weight, if you like, it is starting to drop. And so you can start. It's a simple analogy, but it's something that could be quite effective in terms of how you think about fueling for the demands of your training. Again, if you're doing a sort of short, sharp session, you're not really going to need huge amounts of fuel for that. If you're going out for a longer run, obviously that's something that's a little bit different. You're going to need a little bit more to go with that. And what I'm going to talk you through now is a little bit more about how to actually approach that. If you've seen some of my webinars, or if you've been on some of my webinars before, you know I really like using this slide. I use it all the time. And that's around this idea of context. So, like I say, in terms of sports nutrition, in terms of fueling for the demands of exercise, there is no good food and bad food. There is no right or wrong. It's very much about context and working out what is the most appropriate food or drink for that particular situation. So you can see on the screen, we've got a few examples. We've got a Lucozade Sport, we've got a handful of sweets, we've got some Jaffa cakes, some flavoured milk and some dried fruit. These aren't necessarily the best things to be snacking on all the time at work, at home, things like that. But actually, they're actually brilliant options to be having around your training, during your training, after your training as well. Again, as you can see, these products, they are very high in the sugar, very high in the sort of quick release sugar, the calories, things like that. On your rest days, your quieter days, you're not going to need that. However, on your training days, when you've got big sessions coming up, things like Lucozade Sports, things like the sweets, provide you with that really quick, easy release of that energy. Equally, things like after your recovery, I'll talk about flavoured milk a little bit later on, but things like Yazoo, even normal milk, a pint of milk, is a great it's one of the most nutritionally complete recovery products out there as well. So again, it is adjusting your food choices to suit the demands of your day, suit the demands of your training as well. So, in terms of managing that performance, optimizing your performance while achieving some of your other health goals. This is where you can start to use what I call this, I suppose, performance meal approach. A performance meal is anything you have, or is essentially the meal or snack you have before your training session, as well as what you have after the session. So the meal that you have before the training provides you with the fuel, gives you the energy ready for your, gives you the fuel ready for your session itself, so you're going to be able to perform, train at your best. The performance meal afterwards is higher in the protein, helps replenish, helps the muscle, helps the body to recover after the demands of your training. So we're really trying to protect, we're trying to optimize the nutrition around your training session. So we're trying to maximize that training adaptation. And so in terms of what that might look like, so you can see a few examples if this is sort of before a run. Again, it doesn't have to be just before a run. It could be before a session. It could be things like porridge. If you're running early morning, porridge is always my go-to. Things like your Weetabix, pasta dishes. You can see a few other examples on the screen. Equally, maybe a snack just beforehand. Again, some high carb snacks, things like some toast with jam, some fruit smoothies, sports drinks. Really simple examples of what some of those performance meals, performance snacks may look like that you'd have before the training itself. Equally, nutrition after a run. As I say, nutrition after the sort of post-recovery and nutrition is something that is most commonly overlooked. It's something that doesn't really happen. It's something that a lot of people they focus on the fueling beforehand. They do their training, do their session, and then they go back to whatever it is that they want to eat. And then this may be why they're not actually losing weight in the first place. Whereas actually having a bit of a structure around your post-run, your post-exercise, post-training nutrition can certainly help, as well as optimizing the performance, can help with your other health goals, such as losing weight. In terms of what that actually looks like then, sorry, my slides had jumped. In terms of what that actually looks like, you can see lots of potential meals and snacks to help you. Depending on where you are, if you're out and about, you're going from place to place after your training session, you can see some really quick, easy, convenient snacks to take with you. So I'd always try and focus on using your recovery or getting your recovery from food approach rather than supplements, just from I suppose a food first point of view. But there are times where things like recovery shakes, protein supplements can be quite useful to help with the recovery. Again, if you're out and about, simple options, things like cereal bars, fruit, yogurts, things like fruit smoothies, very quick, very simple way to help optimize that recovery. Depending on where you are, if maybe you've just finished your training session, the sooner you can start your recovery nutrition, the more effective you're going to find this in terms of not only optimizing the recovery, but also managing things like your hunger as well. If you leave it for a long period of time, if you, again, let's say you're away at a competition or away or far from home, and by the time you get home, you're going to be so hungry. Again, sometimes that hunger takes over and you just tend to snack on what you see in the cupboard rather than focusing on getting some good quality nutrition. So it's always worth taking something suitable with you, even if it's something like some form of protein-based wrap or protein-based bagel with some salad in, even just to tie you over until you can get home or till you can get access to a proper meal. And so proper meals might be, again, meat with some pasta or rice, lots of veg to provide additional vitamins and minerals to aid that recovery as well. Again, this is by no means a definitive list, but just having a few examples, having a bit more structure to your post-exercise recovery is just as important as your pre-exercise recovery as well. In terms of what that looks like, so as I say, this is this idea of fuel for the work required, and this is where we can start to periodize your nutrition, or you can start to periodize your nutrition around your training week, around the demands of your day. So what I've got here, this is just an example. This is just an example week that I've made up. So Mondays is our sort of easy day. It's our rest day. We're not really doing much, or we're not doing any formal training as of such. Tuesday might be a really hard day. So we're actually doing 2 sessions on this day. We're doing maybe something first thing, and then maybe you'd go into your running group, something like that later on in the day. So you've got a few hours in between to optimize that recovery. On Wednesday, again, maybe just a one run day where you might run in the morning, and then you've got the rest of the day to do other things, chill out, relax, recover. Thursday, again, is another really hard, really challenging day where you're doing 2 sessions, but this time you may notice your recovery time is a lot smaller. So you might be going to the gym, doing a sort of strength-based session, and then, again, maybe going back to your Thursday night running club and for a second session as well. Friday, this might be a sort of maybe a bit of cross training, going to the gym, jumping on the rowing machine, doing a bit of a recovery bike session, doing some weights, anything like that. Saturday, again, might be a fairly standard day, might be something fairly short, maybe anything from maybe 3 to 5 miles or so. And then Sunday might be your long run day. So this is where you're doing anything from maybe 15, 20 miles, something like that. So that's going to be our hardest day of the week. What we can do, or what can be quite helpful, is to break your nutrition down into these sort of different parts or different meals. So something like a format of having breakfast, a morning snack, lunch, an afternoon snack, dinner, and then an evening snack can certainly help, or it makes it a lot easier for you to manipulate your nutrition around your performance, your health goals as well. In terms of what that might look like, therefore, one thing that can help is to start to essentially color code your meals around your training. And this is where we can do what's called a RAG rating system. So RAG rating is basically where you highlight these meals, either red, amber, or green, depending on how much it is or how hard that session is in the first place. So, as you can probably guess, if the meal's highlighted red, if you're having a bit more of a quiet day, sedentary day, not doing as much movement, you're not going to need as much carbohydrate, you're not going to need as much energy. So you might start to focus on maybe some lower calorie meals, lower carbohydrate meals, maybe looking at those that may be a little bit higher in protein, plenty of fruit and veg to provide you with lots of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants as well. So you can see on Mondays throughout the day, again, we're not doing any training on this day, so we're not really going to need that fuel. So this day, we can reduce that right down. If you're training early doors on the Tuesday morning, this is where for dinner, maybe an evening snack, you might start to incorporate a little bit more carbohydrate, particularly if you're training really early morning, going out for a run at 6 a.m. Chances are you're not going to want to have a huge amount just before running, so you can maybe have a quick high carb snack just before your early morning run. But again, having a sort of carbohydrate-based meal the night before, that glycogen's going to be stored in your muscle overnight. And again, a lot of that will then help fuel you through the demands of that training session. Again, depending on the training that you're actually doing, you notice on this day I've highlighted all in green. If you're doing two really hard training sessions, two really long training sessions, what you then have the rest of the day, so after your first training session, that morning snack potentially, or even your lunch, it almost acts as the post recovery, but equally the pre-exercise meal for your session later on that day. So again, in terms of examples, in terms of what food and drink you use here, is entirely up to you. But again, something fairly high in carb and fairly high in the carbohydrates, the calories, can certainly help ready for your next training session. On Wednesday, maybe you're training at the same time, getting your run done sort of early morning. Again, same thing. We're trying to provide or consume meals either side of this training session to optimize the recovery, optimize our performance, optimize that training adaptation. The rest of the day, though, our work is done. We don't need all that carbohydrate. We can, again, same thing, starts thinking about lower calorie, maybe higher protein options. Again, the protein's going to be really important as part of that post-exercise recovery. Equally, a lot more satiety to help keeping you fuller for longer. Bulking your meals out with lots of vegetables, salad, again, low in calories, high in lots of vitamins and minerals, high in the fibre, which again can help keep you fuller for longer too. On Thursday, again, this is our double training session, but when they're sort of essentially back to back, again, same thing here. Our carbohydrate requirements are going to be they're going to be much higher on this day. So we can start to use that day or use these meals to help us load up those carbohydrate stores ready for the demands of that training. And you can see through the sort of through the rest of the day, this would also apply as well. Obviously, this is just one example. I have made this training program up, but you start to get the idea of what I'm trying to do here. Again, on Sundays, if that's your long run day, I'd always use your long run day to practice your race day nutrition, and that would also include what you have the night before as well. So again, maybe depending on what time you're training, it might be what you have for dinner, starting to think about what you have for dinner, what you have on that day before your long run, just to help train the gut so you can still run at your best without risking sort of any upset stomach, GI issues on the race day itself. So in terms of what this might look like, so when you before your session, like I say, we're focusing on that performance meal before. So it could be something like porridge with a handful of fruit to provide that carbohydrate, that fuel that's needed. After you finish the session, so you do your workout, strength training, running session, whatever it may be, after your workout, something like flavoured milk provides you with the carbohydrates, the proteins, also helps with the rehydration. So we've really protected that training session. We've used our nutrition to optimize our performance there. And the body will now start to adapt. It will now start to recover over the next 24, 48 hours or so. The rest of the day, though, we don't need any sort of high carb meals or any high carb snacks. So this is where we can start to look at some alternatives. So something, if you're training, let's say this is in the morning, your lunch, the rest of that afternoon or that lunchtime could be something like an omelette. So an omelette with some veg, lots of different veg, and some form of protein such as chicken could be a good example. So lots of protein, again, high protein, low carbohydrate. Again, depending on where you are, things like wraps can also be a good one. So again, protein and sort of salad-based wraps, just a simple example. Maybe later on that day, in terms of your dinner, something like a stir fry. So having, again, your sort of protein option and then loads of veg. There's no need, and then having loads of veg, maybe with a small amount or a smaller amount of carbohydrates. So if you're having a stir fry with some rice, you might have a fairly small amount of the rice and focus on a little bit more on getting some good quality protein, lots of veg into your meal itself. And then maybe as a pre-bed snack, might be something fairly high in protein, something like a protein-based yogurt, something like a glass of milk. Again, this is by no means a definitive list, but just an example of how you might do this or how you might manipulate your nutrition to suit your health goals around your training. So, in terms of I am starting to come towards the end of this, so hopefully this has been useful, and thank you for bearing with me. A few tips to help you maintain your performance, but whilst also achieving your health goals. One thing that can be quite helpful is to keep your protein intake fairly high. Obviously, when you're trying to lose weight, what you end up, or what most people end up doing, is they actually end up losing the muscle rather than the fat itself. So it is really important. To take this into consideration. So aiming for around 1.5 grams, 1.5 grams to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass can certainly help, particularly in that sort of weight loss phase. It's also really important to periodize your carbohydrates and your energy. As I say, every day is different, no day is the same, so it's really important to adjust your carbohydrates, accordingly to meet those demands. Again, in terms of your measurements, hopefully what I said at the start of this webinar around your measurements has been quite useful. You don't need to do your measurements every single day. Doing your measurements every day, you're potentially not really going to see much of a change just because you're going to see huge day-to-day variation as it is. The best time to do your measurements is one day a week, and I'll try and do the same day of the week. And the best time to do it is first thing in the morning. So when you wake up, before you have anything to eat or drink, I'd go to the toilet and then do your measurements, whether that be weight, waist circumference, anything like that. So you're just trying to take into account all those variables, all those factors that, again, I mentioned at the start of today's session as well. Again, when it comes to weight loss, fat loss, there are so many supplements, products out there, or again, some of these fad diets, crash diets that talk about this. A good rule of thumb when it comes to anything like this is the fact that if it sounds too good to be true, then chances are it is. If it did work, we wouldn't have an obesity crisis in the UK. If it did work, you wouldn't have those challenges, those obstacles that you face right now. So, for me, the best way, or the most successful athletes I've worked with, are those in terms of their health goals, in terms of their performance goals, are those that can make small changes to their lifestyle, but be consistent with them over an extended period of time that then adds up to make a really big difference. So that's essentially the main part of this webinar. I hope you have found this useful and beneficial. A few more bits from me. My next webinar I'm going to be hosting on the 26th of July at 7 p.m. So that's on a Wednesday. In terms of topics, I will put out a poll to see what people would be interested in for the next webinar. In terms of topics, it's entirely up to you. If you have anything that you'd like me to cover, you can see my email address at the bottom of the screen. If you drop me an email, and I'll certainly add it to my list of webinars that I cover. As I say, I've covered in the previous session common mistakes that runners make. I've covered how to fuel for race days, for example, as well, and they're all available on my YouTube channel. So do check that out. I should say, if this is the first time you've seen me speak, or this is the first time you're really hearing about me, this is basically part of something that I created called the Running Nutrition Hub. In terms of why I created this, I've worked with a number of runners now over the past couple of years for different events, and I work for some sports nutrition supplement companies. I've run the London Marathon twice myself now, and I've done a few. I enjoy my running. I like doing lots of different half marathons. And one thing you do start to realise is how challenging nutrition can be, and actually in terms of the access, the availability for a lot of people to suitable, qualified individuals, usable nutrition advice, nutrition knowledge is very, very limited. So this is something that I have created to start to try and build, try and help that. I want to create a really valuable, really useful resource that's available to anyone who's interested, just to help them with this. If you did find this useful, please do give me a follow on social media. So it's called the Running Nutrition Hub, and it's available as a Facebook group, and it's also an Instagram page as well. As I say, I'm on Instagram as well. My main account is jflemingnutrition. If you've got any friends, family members, if you're part of a running group, again, please, please do share this with them. I'd love to reach out. I'd love to support as many people as I can. I'd love to grow this into be something that's really useful, really beneficial for a lot of individuals. If you found this useful, and if you're maybe looking for a little bit more support, a little bit more advice about how nutrition can help with your running performance, I've recently created an online nutrition running course. It's a 6-module program, and it covers a whole range of topics to help athletes or to help runners with their nutrition. So in terms of what it covers, there's 6 modules. So the first one is what I call my food foundation. So the role, the importance of all those different food groups, but then I've got a module on nutrition for training. So how to fuel for long runs, shorter runs, a little bit more about how to lose weight as well. I've got a section on competition itself, so race day, hotels, traveling. I've got a section on injury, illness, how nutrition can help you with managing or reducing the risk of illness, how to manage injuries as well. I've got a section on supplements. So again, supplements are often this quick fix, or seen as a quick fix, easy access, easy go-to resource. But actually, you can get so much more benefit from a healthy, balanced diet. So there are a few tips, and there are a few risks to using supplements. There are a lot of supplements that don't actually work anyway. So again, there's a whole module on there that talks you through using supplements or how to use supplements safely, and I've also put in a lot of the supplement discount codes that I have for different supplements companies as well. And then my final module is actually around what I call nutrition for life. So in this, I cover lots of other nutrition uses. So things like meal planning, navigating the supermarket, understanding food labels, nutrition tables, takeaways, eating out, stress management, alcohol, again, a whole range of topics. So if you are interested and you'd like to learn a little bit more, if you go on to my website, there's a section called Nutrition Courses, and all the information is available there. In terms of the course, it has been a very useful course. A lot of people have found this very helpful, very beneficial. So I've just put together a few of the reviews from individuals that have completed, have done the program sort of fairly recently, within the past few weeks or so. So if you are interested, like I say, you're more than welcome to sign up to it. The course can be done in your own time. There's no pressure. There's no pressure. It can be done whenever you like, and again, you do have access to it for 3 years after purchase. If you're interested, or if you prefer, I also work with lots of individuals on a one-to-one basis. Again, I do this via remote sessions. I do it face-to-face, subject to where you're living. And I do it in a few ways. I do sort of package of one-to-one sessions where we can go through, discuss your nutrition challenges, nutrition requirements. So if you've maybe got an event coming up and you're looking to optimize, maximize your performance, optimize your training goals, drop me an email. One thing that I always do is a sort of free 20-minute discovery call, so I can find out a little bit more about you, what it is that you're trying to do, how I can maybe help you. But equally, you can find out a little bit more about me, how I work, and how I can support you with your health goals. So, as I say, again, please do drop me an email. Please do get in touch. And I'd love to help you with whatever your goals are. So that is everything from me for this webinar. Like I said, I do hope you found this useful and beneficial. If you have found this helpful, this is being uploaded onto YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, if you've got any friends, family that are interested or would find this useful, then please do share this with them. I do have a month. I do have a newsletter that I'm starting to build and send out on a regular basis. So if you're interested in being part of that, trying to listen or hearing from me around sort of different nutrition topics, what I'm up to, what's going on, some resources to help you, then by all means, please do sign up to that as well. So to sign up, basically go onto my website. So it's just jflemingnutrition.co.uk, and if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see an option where it says to sign up. As I say, I'm on social media, so if you're on Facebook or Instagram, again, check out James Fleming Nutrition. Give me a follow, and again, you'll see lots more content from me as well. But that is everything from me for this webinar. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen. As I say, I do hope you found this helpful and beneficial. The next one, this is something, as I say, I do host these on a monthly basis, so you're more than welcome to join me live for the next one. If not, thank you for taking the time and enjoy the rest of your day.